It's more likely because our ancestor hated the humans, Uwerk says. I'm not entirely sure since the memories of the distant past are vague in my head, but I believe the regular humans and the humans who later became the Lassethi belonged to two opposing tribes. One of the tribes lived underground, worshipping the Magium node as deities, while the other tribe lived on the surface. I think that when the Magium nodes were originally discovered, the ancestors of the humans tricked the ancestors of the Lassethi to go and investigate the underground tunnels, and then they took away the rope that they used to climb down, leaving them all stranded. They would later also seal the entrance to make sure that nobody would ever find their way down there again. Our forefathers have always hated the human ancestor for doing this to them, and their hatred towards their enemies have been passed down from generation to generation until they could finally make their escape. Is this why marriage between humans and Lassethi is forbidden by Lassethi? How did they escape? Did they manage to invent climbing tools? That's kind of funny. Since they worship the nose, does this mean that the Magian spoke to them? And that's kind of funny, I gotta say that. Nothing else is super interesting, like I already know that it's banned. And also, since they worship the nose, does that mean the Magium spoke? Actually, I want to know all three of them. I'm just gonna load. Let's try the middle one first, because that's kind of funny. How did they escape? Did they manage to invent climbing tools? No, they invented a teleporting device. Hardrick says, with only the tools and material they had underground. You have to understand that it took them hundreds of years to escape from the underground. Uwerk said at first they had trouble even surviving. They had to learn what type of underground mushroom and plants were edible. They spent years exploring the vast underground network of caves that exist all throughout Varathia. But eventually they learned all the things they needed, and they began to exploit all. And now I don't want to load this because this is very interesting. I thought this was just a funny thing. They began to exploit all the resources at their disposal. Their quick technology advancement did not begin, however, until they finally learned how to extract knowledge from the Magium. You said earlier that extracting knowledge from Magium was easier than like breaking down Ceridium walls and climbing up. That's insane. You said earlier that you knew of an event similar to the strange awakening of the crystals that we are experiencing at the moment. Where it says, was this in some way related to the transformations that those humans have undergone, which led them to become Lassethi? I believe so. Of course, it would be practically impossible to do a proper analysis after all this time has passed. Well, logically speaking, one would normally assume that it was prolonged exposure to the awakened crystal that triggers the drastic changes to the people aura. From the knowledge that the Magium has given me, it appears that the crystals awoke from their slumber after some sort of underground explosion that was triggered by accident. I think it took more than 100 years for the crystal to go back to normal since then. If this is true, then I can only hope that the event we are experiencing now will not end up changing our auras even further. You can worry about that later, Meredith says. You said that it took entire generations for these crystals to have any noticeable effect on our ancestors, so we should have enough time to figure things out. I suppose that is true, Uwerk says. What I'm more worried about is whether these crystals would have any immediate effects that we are unaware of, Meredith says. If these memories of yours from the distance past tell you anything else that could be of use to us, for example, would you by any chance know of a way to put these crystals back to sleep? I'm afraid not, Uwerk says. All I know is that by the time our ancestors managed to finally escape from the underground caverns, the crystals were already asleep. I don't think our forefathers did anything special to make the crystals stop vibrating. My guess is that after a time they simply stopped on their own. Meredith says, I'm not sure how helpful this information will prove to be, but at least this is a start. Thank you for your insights, Uwerk. As always, your assistance is greatly appreciated. I actually appreciate you too, Uwerk, for the lore drop. My pleasure, Lady Meredith. Uwerk says as he bows again. I'm curious, Diane says. How did the humans on the surface react when the Lassethi from the underground finally made their way back outside? Did they try to send them back in again? Actually, quite the contrary, Uwerk says. They welcomed them with open arms. You see, it has been hundreds of years since the Lassethi got stranded inside these caves, so by the time nobody on the surface even knew who they were. On the other hand, the Lassethi never forgot. The hatred for the human got passed on from generation to generation, and their parents made sure to constantly remind their offspring that the humans living above were at fault for their poor living conditions. But the Lassethi of the old were a patient people, so they bided their time. They lied to the surface dweller, telling them that they bore them no ill will for their ancestors' misdeeds. They began to coexist with humans peacefully while waiting for opportune moment to enact their revenge. And what was this revenge exactly? Darren asks. The Lassethi spent the next few decades learning ways of humans and infiltrating the society at the highest levels. Uwerk says the majority of our ancestors were also skilled tinkerers and inventors thanks to the knowledge that they obtained from the Magium nodes over the years. So it was very so it was easy for them to gain favors of many important figures at that time. Once the Lesetti managed to obtain positions of significant enough political power, they staged a coup. They dethroned all of the human leaders, placing themselves and their kings and the new rulers. Then they enslaved all the human population, and they proceeded to conquer all of the other tribes, cities, or villages in the immediate vicinity. Hundreds of years later, the Lesetti would form an empire so powerful that it would span across all of Eurathia. Although by that time the humans were no longer their slaves, they had been freed by some of the more benevolent Lesetti rulers that followed them and were allowed to live peacefully inside the Lesetti as second-class citizens, which is what they would continue to be until the total collapse of the Lesetti Empire during the Still Winter. Wow, Darren says, nearly 10,000 years of treating humans as second-class citizens just because of bad deeds of one tribe from an age-long past. Your people sure carry a grudge, huh? Indeed, Uberg says, the Lesetti do not forget easily. Even now, after all these years, this has still not changed. Hey Uberg, Hardrick says, would you mind if I ask you a personal question? Of course not, Uberg says, ask away. Alright. Hardrick says, well, from what I've seen so far, you seem like a pretty smart guy, and you don't seem all that crazy to me, so I was wondering, what is the reason why you dress like this? Oh, you mean why I'm not wearing dark blue robes like the rest of the Lesetti in this place, Uberg says. Honestly, it's just a matter of personal preference. I've never really liked the uniform that people wear around here, and Lady Meredith has been gracious enough to make an exception for me and allow me to wear a shirt and pants instead. Actually, I'm more interested to know why are you wearing boots on your head and socks on your hand, Hardrick says. Oh, that, Urg says, this is actually a social experiment that I'm doing. You see, most people who touch the Magium node, like I did, end up becoming quite insane, so I thought I'd try to dress up like a madman while still acting rationally in order to see how many people can see past the appearances and realize that I have not actually gone completely bonkers. But what I've seen so far, there are very few people aside from Meredith who treat me as a sane person. It's always interesting to see how many people are willing to completely ignore my arguments, no matter how well constructed or logical, just because of the way I dress. Truly, this is a fascinating look in the depths of human psyche, wouldn't you agree? I'm sure, Hardrick says, if that's what you enjoy doing, then who am I to judge? It's not just the way you dress or work, your way of thinking has also changed. You were always a little eccentric, but you would have never thought of dressing like an insane person just to do a social experiment before touching the Magium node. You didn't have the kind of complete disregard for people's opinion of you before. It's hard to put into words exactly what has changed about you, but if I were to try to describe it, it's as if when you entered the Magium realm, a part of you remained there, never came back. I'll have to take your word on that, Lady Meredith, since personally I do not feel all that different from how I used to be, Overk says. From my point of view, I am the same person, only with vastly more knowledge, such as with an unquenchable thirst to learn even more than I already know. If the ways in which I choose to pursue the knowledge made me seem crazy to other people, then this is the price I'm willing to pay. I know, Uberg, Meredith says with a sigh. I've already come to terms with the fact that you will never likely return to your previous self. But that does not mean that I intend to reject the person that you are now. As I've said before, you are free to wear what you want and to do your research in any way you see fit, as long as the quality of your work remains as consistent as before. Now, if there isn't anything else to report, I would really like to discuss something in private with my guest, if you don't mind. Of course, Uberg says, in that case, I will go back to finish my written report. I'm leaving it on your desk as soon as I'm able to. Please do, Meredith says. Farewell, guests of Meredith, Uberg says. To us, it has been a pleasure. Yeah. Nice to meet you too, Hardrick says, waving to Uberg as he leaves. Strange fellow, Hardrick says to Meredith, since Uberg is no longer close enough to hear him, but I think I kind of like him. Yes, Meredith says, as she watches Uberg walking away in the distance. I feel the same way. After a few seconds of pause, Meredith turns back towards the rest of us so that she can finally begin the private conversation that she was trying to have all this time. Now then, Meredith says, it's time to tell you why I called you all here for a second time. The truth is that after a discussion with Barry and Kate, I've come to a conclusion that the original deal I offered you really wasn't very fair to you. As a result, I come up with a better deal for you, which I think even Hardrick might like. Allow me to give you the details. For the next few minutes or so, Meredith tells Hardrick and the others about the deal that she offered me and Kate. I always forget that our character likes to, this book is written from the perspective of our character. So he says stuff like, she offered me and Kate, which I always forget that. I always think like he's gonna say, she offered Barry and Kate, because I prefer reading stuff from a third person perspective rather than a second or first person perspective. What even is the second person perspective? Oh, the second person in the conversation, maybe. Whatever. I usually like to do the big brother or all-seeing eye from a top type of perspective. however the story is written, that's usually how I read media. I usually, when I'm speaking out stories, I say like myself or like me. Oh, this happened to me. Like that guy just attacked me with a fireball, so that it can still sound coherent to you guys. Because it would be kind of awkward. Like every single time something happens, I say, "Oh, that guy just attacked my character with a fireball." So it's kind of probably would be kind of weird, but that's how I read stuff. That's how I prefer reading stuff. I used to read it like normal people back in the day, like how everyone else read it. But I don't know when it changed and I started reading things in like a third-person perspective. But whatever, it's kind of fun actually. Because this kind of allows me to remove myself from the situation. And like if a situation happens that would anger someone or something like that, then I can be angry as a third person rather than directly involved, or like by using empathy and sympathy rather than like it's happening to me sort of situation. You would see me get angry in when I'm usually doing what's it called, Path to Nowhere. Some of the events I get angry, like what the hell is this character doing? So but I usually look at it from a third person perspective, so I can portray my anger through my subjective morality as a separate thing rather than indulging myself into that situation, because I'm not in that situation. So how am I supposed to properly enunciate the feelings of the character might be going through and the connections they have to other people? So like a sinner, I always like, oh, the sinner tried to kill us, so we should try to kill it back or something like that. But in actuality, like if you were on the ground, how likely are you to just kill people? So that's why I usually try to maintain myself as a third person, because I would not be very accurate if I were to speak in first person.